Good evening, everyone. My name's Alan Cann from Nature Spot. I'm very pleased that we have with us this evening Geoffrey Hall, who's the BSBI recorder for Leicestershire and Rutland, and also the county recorder for Leicestershire and Rutland for both flowering plants and for ferns, and I think possibly for a few other taxa as well. When I asked Geoffrey if he would talk this evening, I suggested he might like to talk about the ferns of Leicestershire and Rutland. And he told me that title was far too boring, and he wanted to talk about ferns for fanatics. So we've assembled this collection of fanatics, and we look forward to hearing your talk, Geoffrey. Over to you.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Certainly more people than I had expected. I'm very pleased about that. First off, I've not given this talk before, so think of yourselves not really as viewers, but more as guinea pigs. Second, because when you give a talk, you need to look at your own photo library, you begin to realise that all the photos you had you thought were really good were actually rather rubbish. So I've had to do the best I can with what I've got. And thirdly, I'd like to apologise for my hair, which is everywhere. That's because of lockdown. So, now, the talk I'm going to give is to talk about how to identify ferns. It's trying to get a few more people out looking at ferns. People think they are difficult and hard to identify, and it's one of the groups like grasses and sedges that people shy away from. But I hope this video and the PowerPoint will give a useful resource for people in the future. I'm going to go through the features for ID and look at some of the pitfalls that people can make, particularly with the keys, and look at a few good characters for separating difficult species. I'm then going to look at the top 10 ferns in Leicestershire and Rutland, and then 6 more scarce ones, and then look at some distributional changes. And it is only about the ferns in Leicestershire and Rutland, so I'm not covering anything that's outside the area. I'm also not going to look at very rare ferns because they're usually on nature reserves and they're in very small numbers, whereas they're on private land. So this is just some 10 common and 6 less common species that you might find when you're out to try and encourage a bit of recording. Okay, so I'm going to start the talk now. So what is a fern? Well, the ferns have vascular tissue, which is tubular cells which, well, can you see that? Yeah. Which tubular cells which pass fluid through the plant. That separates them off from mosses, liverworts and hornworts. And they produce spores. You can see those spores here in these little structures. That separates them off from flowering plants. And they have a very, very complicated life cycle, which I'm not going to talk about here, but they do have an independent sexual stage. So that there is a main plant like this big one up here which produces spores, a little tiny one which lives on the ground and produces all the sex cells, the sex stage. I saw these actually in cloud wood. When I looked at them I thought, oh, it's a bryophyte, but then I looked a bit more closely and I realised that they're actually the sexual stage of a fern. And they're these little heart-shaped structures like this. So it's quite a complicated life cycle, and that's what basically separates the fern from the other groups. Facts about ferns, well, they're some of the very oldest plants in the Earth's history. The fossils go back nearly 400 million years. Here's a couple of fossil ferns from the Leicestershire Museum's collections. That one's quite attractive, really. The diversity is mainly from radiation in the Cretaceous, and there are about 12,000 species worldwide, of which there are 27 in Leicestershire and Rutland. Now, that's give or take a few. It depends really how you look at classification, and it depends how many have gone extinct or not. We're not quite sure. The distribution of species in Leicestershire and Rutland is changing quite a lot, and so they are worth studying and certainly worth getting records for. And I'm going to deal about the distribution a bit later. The first thing you do when you want to go identifying is get a key, or at least a book on ferns, and there's quite a few you can use. A very common one is this one here, the Fern Guide by James Merriweather. It's had a couple of editions. I think this is the 3rd edition of this one. He's also brought out a new book which has just come out this week, and I've not actually looked at it, so I've not included it in this talk. It's a much bigger book than this and goes into much more detail. It also covers not only ferns, but horsetails and club mosses. So that's a very common book. The FSC, Field Studies Council, do a guide to common ferns. This is one of their fold-out sheets, which is quite good for a beginner. At least you can help you to place your ferns. You can use the Vegetative Key by Poland and Clements. This has a section at the beginning on ferns and would tell you how to identify them using just vegetative characters. And of course, there's the Book of Stace, as Jonathan Mitchell calls it, the New Flora of the British Isles, the 4th edition, and that again has keys in it for ferns. If you want something a bit more technical, there is the Ferns, Mosses, Clubworts, Ferns, Club Mosses, Coilworts and Horsetails of Cornwalls and the Isle of Scilly, which is quite a big book, but it's extremely detailed. They covered Cornwall at monad level and looked at everything on there. And they looked at all the hybrids as well. And there's some good pictures and details in there, but it is specific to Cornwall. Okay, so that's the main keys you use. I'm not going to recommend you use any of them, but I'm going to go through some of them and some of the features they have during the talk. So, first thing you do is go out to the field and you look at your ferns. So let's have a look at some field characters. And the first thing a lot of people will find is this. This is a little baby fern, a fernlet. And this is what we do with this one. We put a big red circle of the line across it and say, don't even look at it. These very small ferns can't easily be identified from their vegetative characters. This is because the morphology of some of the ferns changes so much during their life cycle, you just can't tell what that is going to be, what it's going to turn into. So just don't bother. Leave them alone, leave them to grow up, and when they're a bit bigger, come back and identify them then. The first thing, particularly if you're a beginner, in fact, especially if you're a beginner, stay away from the young ferns. They just can't be identified. The first thing that most people do is look at the frond. This is the front of it. You can see all these beautiful green, lovely leaves here. And the first thing that people do is look at that and think, oh, well, let's see what we can identify. Well, don't. Stop at that point and turn the frond over, because you want to see the underside. Now, these are the reproductive structures, and these are very good for allocating the fern you've got in your hand or in the field, the genera. So turn the frond over and look at these reproductive structures. I'm now going to talk a bit about those and introduce some terms for you. So these reproductive structures here are called sori. That's the plural, 2 sori, and each single one is called a sorus. They sit on the, usually on nearly all ferns, they're on the underside of the leaf, and they're arranged in various ways. This is the underside of a Dropteris filix mass, a male fern. I want to talk about 3 important terms now, which you'll need to understand because they use them in the keys a lot. And they're actually they're not as complicated as they look, but they are a little bit technical, probably because they're in Latin. So spore-bearing structures are born on the undersurface of this pinna. This is the leaflet. In a sorus, this is the whole sorus, this thing here. It's a whole reproductive structure. Now, this sorus has a number of parts, and I'll show you a cross-section in a minute, but it has a cover called an indusium. In this shape here, this one, the indusium is kidney-shaped. So you can see this, it's a bit like a kidney. So this is the indusium, covers the spores underneath. Oops. And the spores are born in sporangia. Now this one has released all its sporangia, and you can see them all hanging around here on the side of the leaf. So these have this cover on them, and the whole thing is called a sorus. Okay, sorus, indusium, sporangium. Now the shape the attachment and the arrangement of these are diagnostic for genera. So it's a very good place to start. This is a cross section through a Sorus. This is the Indusium, that's the cover that we saw. So this is a cross section through the middle, through the vertical plane, right through the middle of the Sorus. This is the leaf, so it's like we cut the leaf, taken a knife and we cut the leaf through the middle and now holding it up in front of us. So it looks a bit like that. Now, this is the Indusium up here, this is this cover. And it's covering up the sporangia which are inside. Okay, so that's the Indusium, that's sporangia, and this whole thing is the Sorus. Okay, right. So the shape of the Indusium is quite important. As I've already said, we can have this kidney-shaped one. Technical term of that is rainiform, and it's characteristic of the genus Dryopteris, which is a very common genus in Leicestershire. So this is the one we need to look at. There's another one which is J-shaped or crescent-shaped, and these are a little bit old when I got them, I'm afraid. But I think you can just see there, these are a bit they're like a J shape or a crescent. They're certainly very different to that one. And this is the genus Atherium. There's only one common species in Leicestershire, which is lady fern, that has these. Well, they can be linear. This is Atherium. Sorry, this is Atherium scolopendrium, and they're in long lines. These are actually paired, but they appear together. But some of them have single lines as well, but they are linear. So that is our genus Asplenium. Sorry, this is a mistake. This is Asplenium. Or they can be circular and peltate. Okay, so sorry, that's Asplenium, not Atherium, that's Asplenium. So they can be circular and peltate. Now these are circular, and they're attached in the middle. And when they release their spores, they come up like a little bit like an upside down umbrella, or an umbrella that's blown out during the wind. So if you've been out in the gale, you've got an umbrella that's blown out, then they'll look like this. So they're attached in the middle. I think you can see here these little dots. Oops. Little dots here, and there's a circular top. Okay. Another one has little teardrop-shaped, bladder-shaped sporangia. This is Cystopteris. Now, I'm not quite sure, but I think this one might be extinct in Leicestershire now. There are only a couple of populations which were in Mount Sorrel. They might still be there on the bridge, but we don't know. And if you can find one like this, then do let me know, because it'll be a good re-find. I have this sort of teardrop shape. It's basically a circular sporangium with a little flap of Indusium at the top. They can also be circular and marginal. Now you see these are here in about the middle of the leaf here, whereas these are right on the edge. Now these are circular and marginal, and these are in Oreopteris, which is quite a rare fern in Leicestershire. You'll find it in Charnwood and not in very large numbers. But if you go to the west of the country, to Wales, you'll find a lot of it. So again, if you find this one, you found something really special. These two are really very rare in Leicestershire and Rutland, but they have these very characteristic indusia. So if you think you've got something rare, then these are good characters to check. Sometimes you might not find any, and one of the commonest ferns we have is bracken. When you turn it over, most of the time you'll see this, which is nothing. It's just a reverse of a leaf bade. Because bracken doesn't spore very, very much. Not all plants spore, only a few of them, and they spore infrequently. Now, a couple of years ago, when we had the very hot summer, they decided to spore, and the underside looks like this. So these are all the sporangia that are formed, and the Indusium in bracken it's along the margins and it's continuous, so it's like one long ribbon of sporangia that form along the edge of the leaf. So that's quite an unusual event. It happens every few years or so, but quite a lot of time, most years, you won't find it at all. So they're marginal here. Right, so those are some of the reproductive structures that are very good for assigning genera. And now we're going to look at some of the vegetative characters. And this is a picture of a fern. The parts of the fern have their own names. They're very different to the ones that you use for a flowering plant. So the whole upright part of the plant we see in the wood is called a frond. So it's the whole leaf shape, and that consists of a blade, which is the photosynthetic part, and a stalk. This is attached to a rhizome, which is a creeping rootstock, and that has roots. The centre of the lamina, the blade, is called a rachis. And these leaves here are called pinnae, which is the primary division, and they can also be subdivided into other little leaflets, which are called pinnules. Now, if you're more familiar with flowering plants, these are equivalent terms that you'd find in flowering plants. So the leaf is equivalent to the frond, the lamina of the leaf is equivalent to the blade, the petiole is to the stipe, the midrib is to the rachis, the leaflet to the pinna, and the subleaflet to the pinnule. So these are a set of terms specific to ferns. It does make it a bit more complicated. You've got another whole set of terms to learn. You can't just use the same ones you've learned when you did flowering plants, and unfortunately that's just one of those things. But I'll be using these terms throughout the talk. Just try to remember that the major terms are the frond and the rachis, the pinna and the pinnule. These come up quite a lot. Okay. So one thing we need to look at is the shape of the frond. It can be linear and narrow, like this one here, very long lanceolate shape, or they can be broad and they come out much and linear, and they come out much more like ovoid or ovate, or they can be triangular, like this one. These shapes are quite useful in the field, sorry, and we can also have a look at the stalk length. So the lamina sits on this stalk here, and it can be very long. So you can see here the last bit of the leaf ends, and there's a nice long stalk. Oops. Or it can be very short. Now in this one, the leaves go all the way right down to the bottom. There's a little tiny stalk there. So the length of this stalk can also be very important. This is lemon-scented fern, which has a very, very short stalk, and this is male fern, which has a much longer one. So this stalk length can be very good at distinguishing species. As you've been seeing from some of the pictures I've been putting up, the fronds have various degrees of dissection. They can be like this one, or they can be quite highly dissected like these. And this is a very important character. It's also quite a complicated character. So I'll go through this section fairly slowly, and we're going to talk about each different pattern as we go through them, and then one big problem with this. Now, some ferns are simple and undivided. They just have a midrib, that's the rachis, and we can see it on this fern here, the heart's tongue, Splenium scolopendrium, and it's also present on this adder's tongue fern, Ophioglossum vulgatum. So it has a very simple leaf. It's just a blade of tissue with a midrib. Okay, simple, undivided. There aren't too many of those. And this in particular is very common in Leicestershire and Rutland. This one much less so. They can be divided. Now, this is our rachis again, our midrib, and we have leaflets coming off this. in one level of branching. Now these leaflets are called pinna, plural pinnae. So here's a pinna, here's a pinna, here's a pinna, there's a pinna, there's a pinna, there's a pinna, and there's one. So this is one level of branching. This is maidenhair spleenwort. As you can see, these are on little stalks. And this is intermediate poly, and they're not quite on stalks here. But as you can see, these are split into a single branch. So this is one level of branching. Now we can have two. We have a rachis again. This is our pinna, and the pinna can be subdivided into pinnules. Now here's a Droptrus filix mass. Here's the rachis. Here's the main branch here. This is the pinna, and it's subdivided into pinnules. So that's the rachis, the pinna, pinnules. Here we have a hard shield fern, which has a rachis, a pinna, and some pinnules. That's two levels of branching. Okay. We come to the extremely complicated ones, the three levels. So I've put some lines on. This is the main rachis here. This is the pinna. This is the pinnule, and this is the pinnulet. So that's one level here, the pinna, two, the pinnule, and three, the pinnulet. These little ones here. Now, it's sometimes quite difficult to see this in the field, and sometimes it's easier to see this bit rather than this bit. Anyway, that's the third level of branching. And this is Droptrus dilatata, the broad buckler fern. And we don't have very many ferns. I think there's only 3 in Leicestershire and Rutland that have this tripinnate level of branching. They're nearly all 1 or 2 levels. This is quite a rare type of branching pattern. But I hope you're getting used to these names. Rachis for the midrib, pinna for the main leaf, pinnule for the subdivision, and then pinnulet for the second subdivision. Okay. The other one which has 3 levels of branching is bracken, and these are actually, when you look at bracken, you think, oh, it's too difficult and complicated. But if you pick up the whole branch, you can see that this huge great big fern has a main rachis, then it has a midrib and a pinna, which has pinnules. So this is a third 3-level branching. There's also one that doesn't really follow the rules. This is back to our picture I just showed you of Droptrus dilatata with its 3 levels of branching. So that's pinna, pinnule, and pinnulet. And there's this one, which is the lady fern. Now, this has a rachis, and this is a pinna here. These are the pinnules. Now, these sort of go down and form separate little divisions, but don't always. So that might be a pinnulet, but those aren't. So it's sort of what some people call 2.5 times pinnate. Okay? So this is where our rules that we impose on this start to break down. So this is either 2 pinnate or 3 pinnate or 2.5 pinnate. So it's quite, I hope you can see the difference between those two. Okay. The other thing we can look at are scales. Now they occur on the main stem and the stem. They can be different colours. This is a nice gold and a yellow-brown one, which we find on the golden scaled male fern. And these are much dark ones here, which we find on the broad buckler. Here's also density is very important. This is an early frond, golden scaled male fern, which has scales like this. They are brown and golden. They occur very thickly all the way up the stem, right from the bottom, all the way up to the top. This is a picture of Droptrus filix mass, the male fern, which has some scales down the bottom. But again, they peter out as you go up. they all start to disappear and become very thin. Okay, so the sort of density of these on the different parts of the stem is a very important distinguishing character. So look at the colour and the density. Sometimes they have markings. Broad buckler fern has a black stripe in the middle of the scale. Sorry, this picture isn't particularly good to show it, but they do just about shows it. There's a black scale here. Whereas a very similar species, the narrow buckler fern, doesn't. It just has plain brown scales. So these markings on the scales are, again, an important character distinguishing between species. The last thing we need to look at is the growth form. Lots of ferns form these shuttlecock structures. So all of the fronds come out of a single point at the base. So you've got a single point, a lot of things that come out. The only thing it can do is form this sort of structure, an upright shuttlecock. Others have a creeping rhizome, and this is very difficult to photograph. This is Dropteris carthusiana, the narrow buckler fern, and the fern starts here and it sort of creeps its way all the way through the vegetation over here. Now what that means is the fronds come up all over the place. They're not, in this one you see, they're all pointing inwards. All the leaves point inwards from a central stem, so the central rachis. The leaves are all pointing in. They're all pointing into the centre and all the backs around the edge. Whereas this, you've got one pointing that way, one pointing that way, one pointing that way, another one pointing there, that one's there, that one's there. So because we're on this free rhizome, they can come up and they can go any way they want to. So this is a much more irregular, disordered arrangement of leaves in space. There's nothing regular about them. The leaves go all over the place. Whereas here they're nicely arranged into a shuttlecock. So when you're out in the field, the thing you want to look at is that, first of all, is the Indusium, the shape of it. Then, when we've had a look at that and noted it, look at the degree of frond branching and work out whether it's simple, 1, 2, or 3 pinnate. Look at the scales on the stem and the base of the stem, particularly. See if they've got any patterns or not. And then look at the growth form, whether you've got a shuttlecock or a rhizome. So there's 4 things you need to look at. When should you really go out and have a look for these? Well, you can collect them from spring to late autumn. The best time is early to midsummer, so about now, because that's when the fertile spores are mature. You turn the fronds over and you can see all those reproductive structures, and they're just the right shape and size and colour for you to look at. Do take care with forms from extreme shade or sunlight. They can be a bit strange. They can be very stunted, or they can have very short fronds. And towards the end of the season, the sura get very mature and they dry out, and the kidney-shaped ones in Dropteris can shrivel and start to look a bit like ones of Ballisticum. So take care if you're looking at ferns towards the end of the season in the autumn, because the Indusium will be a bit different. So back to some keys. These keys have a major problem. This is a key issue. Right, now over in the red corner we have Merryweather's and his fern guide. In the blue corner we have Poland and Clement, and these two are going to have a punch-up. So, gloves off. Here's Merryweather and here's Poland and Clement. Here's the page in Merryweather with Dropteris. You can see he's got Cambrensis, Boreri, Felixmas, Affinis. Here's the page in Poland and Clement. Polistum achilleatum, Dropteris affinis, Felixmas, Oreades cristata. So, this is where the Dropteris occur. But they're bipinnate. This is what I've told you. See, they are definitely bipinnate. Or are they? Because in Poland, they're not. They're one pinnate. So, there's a big difference here, isn't there? There's a big problem. Why is this bipinnate and why is this unipinnate? Big difference, isn't it? Certainly if you're writing a key, it's a big difference, and if you're learning it, it's a big difference. It's all about precision in terminology. This is Dropteris filix mas, and this is Therium filix femina. Now, the term we've been using is pinnate. Pinnate means having leaflets arranged on either side of a common stalk. There's another term called pinnatisect, which means deeply lobed, almost to the midrib. So, what do we think about this one? Is this pinnate? Are the leaflets arranged on either side of a common stalk? Well, these are leaflets, and they are on either side of a common stalk. But they're not quite separate, aren't they? You can see here, there's little bits of tissue above the midline, this midrib, little bits of tissue here, so they don't quite go down. So as far as Poland and Clements are concerned, these are pinnatisects. They're lobed almost to the midrib. As far as Merriweather is concerned, this is a division. So he calls this pinna. So we go back to our Aetherium. This is our pinna, and this is our pinnule. Now you can see here there is no tissue. There's a definite space, an empty bit of midrib, and we have a single pinnule coming off that. So that, to Poland and Clements, is pinnate. It's also pinnate to Merriweather. Now this is a bit complicated, and I think I'll carry on talking about this because it does make things very, very difficult for beginners. So anyway, pinnate or pinnatisect. Well, let's do something more radical. Let's think about what Stace says. Well, what does Stace say? Well, let's ask him, shall we? Professor Stace, what do you think about this? Well, here's Professor Stace, and he, of course, writes a lot. So from the book of Stace, he says that Dropteris are 2 to 3 to 4 pinnate, usually of one sort. And he says Dropteris filix mas is 1 pinnate with deeply divided pinnae to 2 pinnate. So he's actually being very cagey. He's sort of sitting on the fence, but he's being very, very careful. Stace never says anything without having done a lot of research. So I think what he's saying there is the idea of 1 pinnate it's been around for a long time, but actually they're really, sorry, the bipinnate idea has been around for a long time, but really they're probably 1 pinnate. So again, we can carry on with this. This is one which Merriweather would describe as unipinnate, but Poland and Clements will describe as pinnatisect, because again, it has these little bits of tissue between these pinnae, and he considers these to be simply lobes in a leaf. Now, I know this is very complicated, difficult to get head round. First of all, I'm not trying to cause confusion, but it will cause you problems, because if you start off using Poland and Clements, you'll have a different idea of structure in your head to people who use Merriweather, and when you go out in the field, you'll have a fight, because some people will say it's 1 pinnate, and some people will say it's bipinnate. Now, I don't want you to go out hunting for ferns and then coming back covered in bruises because you've had an argument. So do just be careful that there are different ways of keying these two ferns out, and different ways of looking at the structure, depending on who you've bought, whose book you've bought, and depending on who you favour. Now, the keys, of course, are for native plants and a few established aliens. Now, they completely break down when you start introducing exotic species, which do escape from cultivation. I've got this one in my garden. This is a Dropteris cycadina, which has escaped. There are 14 records now from 6 Viscounts. It's escaping into the wild, and it's one we might see in the future. Now, this is a nice Dropteris with unipinnate fronds. This is a little division here. It doesn't go right down as far as the one in Dropteris, and it certainly doesn't go down as far as the one in Polypodium. And this is called pinnatifid. So this is a little slightly divided. It's very, very slightly divided. Now, if you actually want to see a Dropteris which has unipinnate fronds, there's another one I grow in my garden. This is Dropteris seboldii, and as you can see, it just has one pinna. It's a bit like a lot of hart's tongue ferns slung along a long central rachis. It's an absolutely lovely fern. It comes from Japan, and there's one record in the BSBI database from Buckingham Palace Gardens. So you know, if you've got this, then you know you're doing what the Queen is. She's got it. It must be good. So go out and get one, and you can be just like the Queen. Now, these names they don't really have particularly good common names. This one is called the shaggy shield fern in the literature, which is astonishing, really, because there's nothing like a shield fern, Polystichum. So I don't know why it's called that. And this is called Sebold's wood fern, because nobody else can think of a suitable name for it. But it is rather nice. This one probably won't escape. It's a bit tender, but this one certainly will, and it may hybridize. But the point about showing you this is not to show you pictures of exotics that you'll never see. Is to show you pictures of a Dropteris with a single line of branching. Okay, so it's just one level of branching. Right, some good separation characters, some species which are often a bit muddled up. Right, 2 male ferns. Male fern Dropteris filix mass and golden scale male fern Dropteris affinis. People do muddle these up a bit in the field, but they're quite easy, really. What you do is turn the fern over again. Remember, turn the fern over. And what you'll see, where the pinna here joins the main rachis, there's just green tissue in Dropteris mass. In the golden scaled male fern, there's a black mark. There's a big black mark here at the junction of the pinna and of the rachis. It's a lovely black mark. That's diagnostic for this species. And as you can see, as it's a golden scaled male fern, it has lovely golden hairs which go all the way up the top, whereas the Dropteris has a couple of pale scales that have vanished now. There's not very much up there at all. It's more of a glabrous rachis at this point. So look for this. This dark black mark will tell you you've got a scaly male fern. But be careful, because late in the season you can get all sorts of things happening. This one's a bit manky. I don't know what's happened to it. It might have been infected with something, or it might have been damaged, but it's starting to develop these little patches, and they can superficially look a bit like a black patch. And certainly if you look at the Dropteris finis ferns, sorry, Dropteris filix mass ferns, the male ferns, in January or February when they're quite old, they will look a bit black. So don't try to identify these out of season unless you're really, really competent, because you can get little black regions there developing. It's just fern is dying off and it's starting to decompose. But during the main part of the season, the early spring to the autumn, you'll see these black regions here. 2 buckler ferns. These are the broad buckler ferns. I've dealt a bit on with these earlier. The narrow buckler fern has this creeping rhizome, and it has the scales which are pale, whereas the broad buckler fern has a nice shuttlecock shape and scales that are black. These are absolutely diagnostic for these two. If you think you've got this one, then look at the scales and look at the rhizome. If you this one's quite common. So next time you're out and you find one, pull a few of the scales off at the base down here and have a look at them, and you'll see this black stripe. Now, 2 shield ferns. I've copied a bit out of Merriweather's Fern Guide because I can't find anything better than this to show you the difference. These two are often confused by people when they first start out because they look very, very similar. The hard shield fern and soft shield fern both occur in Leicestershire and Rutland, and this one particularly much more common. They have the Undivided polystichum, and this can be identified by this thumb. At the bottom of the pinnule, you have a big lobe of tissue which sticks out and looks a bit like a thumb. It has it on this one here and this one here, and that's fairly good a method for identifying polystichum in the field. It's a good GIS character. It also has these little spinnules on the top. These are little tiny sort of hairy projections called spinnules at the top, which go around there. In Polystichum certificum, the pinny down the bottom, we always look, and these we need to look at the bottom of the midrib here. They've got stalks. These have stalks, but they become progressively less stalked. And what we need to do is look at the angle. If we put a line along the base of the pinnule, and then up the other side, we get an obtuse angle on Polystichum certiferum. If we do it on Polystichum acudatum, it's an acute angle. So that's quite a good way of measuring it. Another way is looking at the pinnules here. As you see on here, they lie, this bottom axis, this bottom edge here, lies along the main axis of the leaf. So you get a long sort of rectangle of dark, and gradually they will actually lie along there and cover it. Whereas these, because of this obtuse angle, they always stick up, and you always get a space along, whoops, you get space along the leaflet, so you never really get them closing. So they don't actually lie on them. They're not level along them like this. They're pointing away. As you can see here, well, this is certiferum, and here they are. They're lying all the way along the midrib here of this benna. Whereas here they're pointing up and away, and you can see that there's this space between them. This does take a bit of time to get used to in the field, but when you've seen a few of them, it does become much easier. Some people say if you hold this one up to the light, then you can't see very much coming through. Whereas if you hold this one up, you can see a lot. Now that's a bit of takes a bit of practice. But I think if you look for this angle, then you'll have a good chance to distinguish it. The stripes are short and long. The frond brace is narrow on this one and broad on that one. So again, these are some quite good characters. If you are unsure, these are some secondary characters you can look at. The primary character is this angle between the two leading edges of this pinnule. Okay. Where do we find them? Well, we can find them in lots of places. We can find them in woodland, common, very obvious habitat, rivers and stream banks, ditches. Do look in ditches. There's a lot of ferns in ditches. I think haven't been recorded before because people haven't looked enough. You find them in grassland, not only grassland inhabiting species like the Adder's tongue fern, but you can also find Dropterus filix mass growing on land which has been cleared of woodland or cleared of scrub. They do persist and they can become quite dense. A lot of ferns in Leicestershire are on walls, and there are a lot of walls. There's a long history in the county of canals and water transport, which have bridges which do have a lot of ferns on them. There's old railway bridges which are fern covered, and of course urban structures. In urban structures particularly, you'll find the ferns inside inside road culverts. And quite often when we go out on the BSBI meetings, we find ourselves peering at a drain in the middle of a suburban housing estate with a lot of people around us who are quite perplexed about what we're doing and think we're completely mad. But we're actually just peering around for ferns which live very nicely in the culverts in housing estates. So when you're out, do have a look at the drains, ignore all the rude comments from people, and tell them that you're actually looking for ferns, and then they'll just go away. It's very easy. Now, in urban, this is a bit of urban Leicester. This is down behind the football ground where I found myself one day. There's a big clump of ferns all growing around here. So you can find them in very interesting places in urban areas. A lot of people think of ferns as epiphytes, but there aren't many epiphytic ferns in Leicestershire. The only one is Polypodium, and I haven't seen it very much at all on ferns, on trees. It occurs mostly on walls and urban structures. For example, here, this is a Polypodium on the wall. So there's not too many on trees. There are more of them than there were in the past. I think they're starting to increase, but you won't get sort of lush, ferny, fern-covered treescape that you see in Wales or in Scotland. Right, now we go on to the top 10 ferns. So, okay, pop piggers, it's time for our top 10 ferns. Coming in at number 1, the male fern, Droptis filix mass. It's found in 549 tetrads. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the terminology, a tetrad is a 2 by 2 kilometre square, 4 square kilometres. It's a standard unit of biological recording, botanical recording. So we go out and we look in our 2 by 2 kilometre square, and we see if we can find it or not. So this means that we've found this fern in 549 squares since 1980. So this is total records for 40 years. I chose 1980 because it's when the team that wrote the last floor of Leicestershire and Rutland stopped recording. Now, I know the book was published in 1988, but it took them a long time to write it. They actually stopped recording around 1979, 1980. So I chose this as the first year following the publication of the last flora. So 549 tetrads. And coming in at number 2 is broad buckler fern, Droptis dilatata, with 312 tetrads. There are about 740 in Leicestershire, so this is about half. About 1 in 2 tetrads you'll find broad buckler fern. Coming at number 3 is hart's tongue, 311. I've got quite a bit to say about this later, but that's a lovely fern. It was present in a wall opposite my house until it was repointed. But it's certainly a very, very nice fern and very attractive to see. 4 is bracken at 222 tetrads. Number 5, woolrue, Asplenium rutimeraria, 180. Number 6 is black spleenwort, Asplenium adiantum nigrum at 144. Number 7, maidenhair spleenwort, Asplenium trichomenes, 113. Number 8, the lady fern at Atherium filix femina, 106. Number 9, the soft shield fern, Listicum certiferum, 103. And last of all, polypody. Now I've grouped all the polypodiums together, and I'll explain why I've done that later. And they have 85 tetrads. So as there are about 740 tetrads, you're thinking about 1 in 10 tetrads you'll find a polypody. Okay, so that's the top 10. I'm going to look at those in a little tiny bit more detail now. 6 of them you can find in woodland, hedgerows, ditches and grassland. So I'll deal with these 6, but hart's tongue can also be found in brickwork and in culverts. This is our male fern. This is a distribution map of the fern. It has a shuttlecock shape, it's bipinnate and has these lovely kidney-shaped indusia. Now, this gives the density of records per tetrad. So you can see there's a lot of records of this over in this area. This is a pattern. People record in charm book because it's nice. The other pattern is this bit, which is empty because nobody records. But I think what this does show is that there are this is a stronghold for this fern up in Charnwood, but it is generally distributed throughout the county. It does peter out a bit as we get up here in the Vale of Belvoir and the more intensively agricultural area of the county. You find it in woodland, hedge banks, stream side, wasteland. I found it growing on concrete in Stretton Airport. You find it on walls, parks, gardens. People plant it, it escapes. You find it all over the place. It's a generalist, and it's very good at exploiting all sorts of habitats. It's not fussy about whether it's wet or dry or calcareous or acidic or neutral. It can live wherever it likes. And it really is a very adaptable fern, and it's the commonest one. In fact, when you go out and you're starting out as a beginner, the first thing you can do when you found a fern is say, why is this not Dropteris Felix Mass? Because most of the time, ferns that you'll find will be this one. Now, the next one on our list, number 2, broad buckler fern, Dropteris dilatata. This is one of our tripinnate ferns, which has a top, and it has the stripes. Again, its stronghold is up here in Charnwood, and a few little stronghold here. This is Leafield Forest, and some of the older woods. There are patches of woodland down here, and quite good hedge down here. It's again less common than the Dropteris Felix Mass, but it seems to, when I've seen it out, you see it quite often on old rotting tree stumps or on branches, particularly rotting tree stumps, and it does seem to prefer those as a substrate. You don't often see it growing in the ground. It can grow, I mean, it can grow quite luxuriantly in the ground, and you'll find that in places like Dinginsdale. But more often than not, you'll find it growing out of the base of an old rotten tree stump or a bit of old rotten wood. So even if you don't see anything growing out of the ground, go and have a look at the tree stumps, because that's where you think you'll find this one. Hart's tongue. This is a fern with a simple blade, and it has linear sori. It grows in woodland. This is a patch of ferns, I think it was in Ketton Quarry. And it also grows on brickwork. This is in Ayleston Meadows. This is one of the bridges over the old bridges over the Great Central Railway. And this was absolutely covered in Hart's tongue. It does seem to have a preference for lime mortar. And this is its main distribution. Again, quite common in Charnwood, but look, this is the urban area. This is Leicester City going up through Birstall. There's a lot of records for it there. And then this is Hinckley, Sapcote, Burbage. And this is the A6 and the Grand Union Canal. And this is over the Rutland, where we have a lot of villages with stone walls. So this is what this is telling us is it's fairly well distributed, but it does have a bit of a concentration on built structures. So this is quite a good, this is an interesting plant because it does grow in woodland very well, and it does grow on walls very well. So it's got a fairly mixed distribution. Bracken. Now, bracken's a bit odd, isn't it? You think we'd have a lot more in the county, really, but it really is confined now to this area of Charnwood and also the Leafield Forest. There are a few areas up here where are some woods and some very good hedge banks. There are odd populations of it. I found some. I'm not sure quite whether all of the bracken we have in the county is native. Some of the bracken up here will definitely be native, but I found a very big patch of bracken in the vegetation that had been planted outside Sainsbury's in Oadby, and it's the only bracken in that tetrad. So I don't think it's native. I think it's coming with all the planting, so it's probably a bit of Welsh or Scottish bracken or Dorset bracken that's, you know, surviving up here. It's probably got a completely different genotype for anything else, so I don't know, it might just become a triffid later on. We'll have to wait and see. But it has these huge Tripinnate fronds, mostly doesn't spore, but just occasionally does. Okay. The lady fern, this prefers much wetter soils and humidity, and really a feature of ancient woodlands. Again, we find it in the ancient woodlands up here in Charnwood, and these here in the Leafield forest. It's only really occasional everywhere. You'll find it in a very wet ditch. We find it in a bit of scrap of old woodland, and it's got a stream going through it, or very wet. Unless it's wet, you really don't get it. It's if you go to Martinshaw Wood, there's quite a bit there on the western side of the motorway. If you go towards the north, there's a good valley there, which is a damp, it has a stream run through it. It's a very damp, humid valley, and there's a good population of it there. I think that's where I got this photograph from. It has our 2 to 2.5, sometimes 3 pinnate leaves, and these J-shaped or C-shaped sporangia, which we saw earlier, and it does form shuttlecocks. It's a very nice fern to see, and when you see it, it's quite obvious because it looks very delicate and it looks very frizzy. So it's fern that does quite stand out. It's very pale yellowy green as well. I'd like to see this, but it is very uncommon outside areas of really old woodland. The shield fern. This is quite an interesting fern. When it's young, it puts out these little the fronds, and they bend over like this, and all the ones at the side bend over, so it looks quite droopy. It has it looks a bit like the golden nail fern because it has this very thick, dense, hairy rachis. But these are a completely different shape to the golden nail fern. They don't have this sort of droopy appearance. And the individual pinnules have this little thumb stick out, and the peltate sporangia. Now, it's got a quite interesting distribution. This is a fairly recent arrival, and I'll talk about this one later. So I'm not prepared to say too much about this distribution. This is, again, a sort of western area, but we've got a few more coming over in the east. Now, in the last Flora of Rutland, which was published in 1972, there were no records of this fern in Rutland. So in the last 50 years, all of this has appeared. The first record, I think, was about 1981 in Rutland, but it's now started to appear. And when I do go out looking at woods, I usually find this. I usually find 1 or 2, or I find it in a ditch. It's not uncommon now. Now it's quite odd really, because its main distribution is west and north. And if you go to Wales or Scotland, you'll find lots of this in the woods there. Particularly in West Wales, it's quite dominant in some of the woods. But it was very uncommon here. So this is a fern that's moving. Now, 4 of the 10 you can find on walls, bridges, urban structures, and rock faces. Well, I'm going to look at those now. This is Walroo, a very pretty fern, going out of a brick bridge. And it has linear sporangia. I think you can just about see the lines here. These are a bit overripe again. Underneath, the lines all coalesce and form a pattern. You see a line there, a line there, a line there, and a line there. This, as we can see, has quite a strong urban distribution. This is Leicester, and these are the roads down to Hinckley and Sapcote. This is again the Grand Union Canal. This is the Ashby Canal. Oops. And these here are Rutland villages, which will have limestone walls or ironstone walls, depending which part of the county you're in, and lots of gardens with walls, so they grew very, very well on there. This is a very attractive little fern. It's quite a bit hard to misidentify this one. Right, black spleenwort. This is another wall-based fern. It's a splenium, so it has linear sporangia, and as you can see, they start out like this quite early in the season. Then they all start to coalesce, and eventually the whole of the underside of the leaf becomes covered in sporangia. It's a triangular structure here, and it has 3 levels of branching. So it has pinna, pinnule, and pinnulette. This is it's on our 3 levels of branching, our tripinnate ferns. Linear sporangia, tripinnate. If we look at the distribution again, it's another strong urban distribution here. This sort of Hinckley, Leicester, Loughborough corridor. This is the Grand Union. This is the Grantham Canal up here. I think we're finding most of the records along here on bridges along the Grantham Canal. It's a very, very attractive fern. It has at the base of this main racket it's black, where it gets its name from. I didn't have a review photograph of that, but here it's very, very black, and which distinguishes it from the green spleenwort, which is green all the way up. So this base is very, very black. Maidenhair spleenwort you can find again on bridges, particularly common on bridges and walls, over canals. It has a narrow linear leaf shape with 1 level of branching. Again, it's in the splenium, so it has linear sporangia. Here they are, these linear ones in the back of the leaves, and then they'll eventually open up and coalesce and produce all the spores, like we saw in the other one. Very delicate fern. There are 3 subspecies, and we only have 1 in Leicestershire. That's subspecies quadrivalens, because the other 2 are confined to really very acidic habitats. We don't have those. We have limestone mortar in bridges, and this is what it likes. This is called subspecies quadrivalens, and again, very much an urban distribution. And the last one is the polypody. It's a plant really of 2 areas. We find it up in Charnwood, where it does grow on the soil, it will grow on the forest floor, it grows on a little bit as an epiphyte on old buildings, and we find it, and it also grows on bridges and canal. And the other area is down here in Rutland, where we find it a lot on houses, on walls around gardens. And this is actually a wall of a garden in Liddington, I think, yeah, Liddington. This fern here had fronds which were nearly, about 1/2 a metre long. They were gigantic, and it was really very happy growing on the wall. Now, if you're of course familiar with Cornwall or Devon or the southwest, you'll be familiar with seeing walls like this out in the countryside. So when you're driving around, the earth-clad walls, they will be covered in ferns like this. And it's very happy on these walls. It can get its roots down into the spaces between, and it's quite protected. It has circular or sometimes elliptical sporangia. They start off as little blips like this, and eventually open up. The Indusium disappears very quickly, so most of the time you just have a naked mass of sporangia. Excuse me. So you often, that's about the best bit of the Indusium you'll see. It'll get a little bit bigger than that, and then it'll shrivel and disappear. So they tend to be naked. And it has a broad outline, and it's unipinnate, pinnatisect. depending on whose book you bought. Okay, now as I said, that the polypodies, they are quite difficult to identify, so I lump them all together because you can't be sure from the leaf shape really which one you've got. If you want to be absolutely certain, then you have to look at the sporangia. Now here's some sporangia under the microscope. If you're going to be a polypody person, and I'm sure you're all actually can't wait to be polypody people. In fact, you can probably get t-shirts made, which I am a polypody person on it. What you'll be doing is you'll be going home, getting your microscope out, and you'll be looking at the sporangium. The back of the sporangium has a little basal cell, which is here, and it has these thickened cells here. See these cells here? They've all got really thick cell walls, so they're also pigmented. The light brown here, as it ages, they go orange. And this is Polypodium vulgare, the polypody, the common one. And it has a lot of these indurated cells. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. If it was interjecting, we'd only have about 6 to 7. So this is one way we identify them. We have to get them on the microscope, count all these up. There's actually a spore, that's a fern spore sitting there. And it's quite dark, so we know it's a viable spore. If it wasn't viable, it would be completely very pale yellow and empty, and we'd know we've got a hybrid. So the other thing when we're looking at these under the microscope is you have to look at the spores and the shapes. Now this is a bit advanced. I don't expect beginners to do this, but I'm just showing you the sort of things that make some of these ferns difficult to identify, while we often just lump them all together. So why are these things so difficult to identify? Well, because they're hybrids. We have a fern called Polypodium cambricum, which is the southern polypody. And if you go to the south of France or the Mediterranean, you find it growing all over walls and cliffs, old buildings. Now that, we also have Polypodium vulgare, the polypody we find in this country, the native. Now they got together at some time in the past and they hybridized. Now those numbers are the numbers of chromosomes that each has. And it's quite a large number really, isn't it? So they got together and they hybridized, and they produced a plant called Polypodium fontqueri. It's sterile. It has 111 chromosomes. But of course, oh well, I don't want to be sterile, I want to go out and I want to produce lots of new ferns. So what do? They undergo a chromosome doubling, produce Polypodium interjectum, which is fertile, and has 222 chromosomes. That is a lot of chromosomes, isn't it? And you think to yourself, well, why? Why do we have all these chromosomes? And to be honest, nobody's really sure. It's thought that because these plants are so old, they've just accumulated a lot of baggage. It's like, you know, you go to get a house or a flat and you live there, you move in, there's loads of space, and then 5 years later there's nothing. It's just full of stuff. This is what these are just full of stuff. Nobody who knows what it does. It probably did something in the past. Nobody who knows probably doesn't need it now, but it might need it in the future. So who knows? Anyway, this method of chromosome doubling is very common in plants. It's the way that new species are produced, and it's very common in ferns. And the Dropteris finis, the golden scale male ferns, do this a lot. And they're very, very complicated, and it's very hard to work out where the parents actually came from. So that's why they're quite difficult, because they're a bit variable. Obviously, you've got a few characters of this, and a few characters of this in there. So this is why shape isn't so good. You have to look at things like sporangia, which are more constant, much, much more constant. So let's start with our top 10. I'm going to deal with, just briefly, with a scarce 6. Golden scaled male fern, caddis tongue, hard shield fern, narrow buckler, rusty back. Dropteris finis has about 60 tetrads, it's quite common, and down to blackened spicant is 22. That's much less common. So these are, again, your foil, if I'm 1 in 10 tetrads here, you're looking at 1 in 30 for this. So these are very, very, very uncommon species. Well, not very uncommon, they're uncommon. There's obviously golden scaled, male, beautiful, furry midrib, and its shuttlecock shape. We find it predominantly up here. Again, Charnwood, Old Woodland, and Leafield Forest, Old Woodland. This is Pickworth Greatwood and associated Pickworth Parkwood, Lawnwood, not Lawnwood, Adderwood, and the other woodlands up here in the borders of Leicestershire and Lincolnshire. So this is a fern Old Woodland. If you're not in Old Woodland, you'll struggle to find it. I did find it down here in a bit of manky old land off the side of Lutterworth Road. It was quite a sandy, acidic soil, and I think it's persisted there over the years. But it's not. There were a few of them in old hedge bank on a ditch, which I traversed by stepping over using all the fly tipping, which is filling the ditch. As a sort of a stool. But anyway, I did find this down here. So it's not common up here, but these are the areas that you find it mostly. So these are the old woodland areas. There are 3 subspecies, Aphinis, Boreri, and Cambrensis. Aphinis is rare. You find it over here in the northwest, really. This one here turned out to be Aphinis, which was a bit odd. So it tends to be up here where you find the Aphinis. Boreri is very common. It's the most common species in Leicestershire and Rutland. There's only one site for Cambrensis, which is at the Brand, so if you're not there, you won't find it. There's a possibility that you might find 1 or 2 more up around here, if you look more carefully. But these are very difficult to separate. I could give a whole hour talk on how you separate these 3 out, and you probably wouldn't be any the wiser either. So we tend to record them as an aggregate, Dioptrus Aphinis aggregate, which means we know it's a big, complicated. We know what the thing basically looks like, but we can't really place it into these very easily. So it's not a thing for beginners. It's actually quite hard for experts to do this. And you have to look at a lot of characters, and you end up taking really the best, the ones which fit it the best, and working out how many you got. So it's not easy at all. Adder's tongue, it's a lovely, isn't this just lovely? It has this lovely simple blade. Instead of having sporangia on the back in little sori, like every other fern, it has them all arranged on this stalk. So this little thing here is a sporangium, this little thing here. So this has got a stalk here, lots and lots of sporangia. Look. They can be single or they can be double. But usually you find that there's this one here conveniently lost its lower leaf. It would have been eaten by something. But you can see there's a double layer of them, 1 on each side of the they're quite ferns which are separate. This and the moonwort are quite different from the other ferns you've been dealing with. They're still ferns. You still produce spores, vascular tissue, and they have a complicated life cycle. This one likes old grassland, and you won't find it outside old grassland. It really is restricted. It comes up in the early spring, sort of April. This is a picture of one which is growing on the Evington golf course, which Russell found, which I've been to have a look at. It's probably an old bit of grassland there that's persisted. The golf course was actually made in about 1900 out of old meadows, so I guess it's just hanging on. It's managed to hang on for 100 years. I hope it hangs on for a bit more. We got some up here in Charnwood, and then just in odd places. This is actually the golf course here, and there's one little site further south where you can find it, but it is very scattered. There's no real pattern. Pattern is old grassland, old unfertilised. Once you fertilise it and mow it, it just vanishes. You can't cope with that. This is the populations up here are in places like Markfield, on roadside verges in Markfield, but old grassland. It has distinction in the highest number of chromosome pairs of any British plant. It's got between 500 and 520 pairs. And if you're asking yourself, well, that isn't very precise, is it? Well, you try counting them. They're tiny. And I mean, how can you even keep count? I mean, you must take forever. You must have things to say, well, 396, 397. Oh dear, the doorbell's rung. Right, where was I? Oh yes, 1, 2. You can imagine it, can't you? Go on forever. So it's got between 500 and 520 pairs, maybe even up to 440. So again, quite an old, very old plant. It's got loads of junk it doesn't need really, but it certainly seems to thrive on it. Anyway, here's the hard shield fern, Polystichum aculeatum. This is a bit like Certiferum, but has remember the very narrow acute angle between the pinnules. It is not on the distribution again, charnwood and the saw corridor here, because it likes wetter, humid conditions, but it also likes calcareous soils. So you find a bit more of it over here in Rutland and south east of Leicestershire. So it's either wet or calcareous. We have found a couple here in the edge of the, these are in the Traitor Valley around Euston. No, here, Traitor Valley around Euston. So again, wetter, more calcareous. Narrow buckler fern, Ruptus carthusiana. Again, it prefers more acidic soils and ancient woodland. So again, concentration up in charnwood and again, leaf-filled forest here. Very, very scarce outside. This is the Wildlife Trust Reserve at Market Harborough. This is the Wildlife Trust Reserve at Market Harborough. This is the, I can't remember what that is. I always can. That I think is Croft. And again, up in the northwest. So it has, it looks for, you're looking for old woodland, more acidic soils. There's quite a lot of it in Martinshire Wood, if you're interested in trying to find this one. In fact, Martinshire is quite a good place to start because there are quite a few species there. And you can wander around quite freely to the Woodland Trust area, Woodland Trust Reserve, and you can find half a dozen or more species of woodland ferns there and test your skills. So Martinshire Wood is a really good place to start. Rusty back. Why is it called rusty back? Well, it's got a rusty back. It's got all these little hairs and sporangia. It's another asplenium, so it has linear sporangia, but it has a very hairy back. The hairy back means it can live on very well on walls. I've seen this plant in walls in the south of France as well, in really sort of curled up to a crisp in the summer, then the rains come along and it opens up again. I think it's a really, really attractive plant. I found it in several places. As you can see, this is the Leicester Loughborough corridor, and a few down here along bridges on the Grand Union Canal, and a few here on walls in Rutland. It's really confined to mortar walls and bridges. It's a calcicole, as I said, it likes limestone, and it's increasing a bit. I was at Great Glen down here, and I walked through, there's a footpath that goes near Glen Parva, near the Young Offenders Institute, and there was a bridge I was absolutely covered in it, about 50 or 60. I think it's one of the nicest ones that I found. I think it's a very, very attractive fern, and it's just starting to increase. And the hard fern, Blackman spicant, it really is confined to wet, acidic soils, so it is only in charnwood. It's quite an odd fern. It has quite long linear fronds, narrow linear fronds with single levels of branching. It produces, these are the vegetative fronds here. It produces a sexual frond, which produces the spores, as we know, along here. And this has a different shape. This is thinner, darker and blacker. You can see them poking up amongst the top. So I don't have a photograph of that. I will try and get one for the future. But this is quite a different shape. These are much, much thinner. They're about half the width of these, and it's larger and it sticks up through the middle. Unipinnate. Confined here, you'll have to be in Charmwood to find this. This was one plant that Russell and I found in the Chater Valley. I'm not quite sure where these are. Oh, that's Hambleton Wood on Rutland Water. I don't know where that one is. No. Okay, up in Charmwood. Right, let's have a look at the changes in distribution, shall we? So what I've done is I've looked at the number of tetrads where we have records pre-2000, post-2000. So it's the percentage change in the trend. Now, there's one thing before we start here. One, these are only records of occurrence. It doesn't tell us how many there were per tetrad. Also, they're not, the comparison is quite skewed. Now, pre-2000, so that's everything that we've had since records began in 1747 with Richard Pulteney. So that's 253 years of records. And this is post-2000, so that's 20 years of records. So the number of the time period is actually 10 times less, a tenth of the time here, or 10 times more. So what do we find? Well, what we find is even common ferns like this have increased. Now, I don't think we've done any more recording in 20 years than we've done in the last 250. But we're certainly finding more. Maybe we're looking at different habitats. We're not just looking at natural areas, we're looking at urban areas as well. So there could be a bit of recording bias there. But there does seem to be a change. Those have gone up. And if we look at the ones that are going up, wall ferns are going up, wallrue, black springwort, maidenhair fern, polypodies, these are all going up. So what that means is either, again, we're looking at these structures more than people in the past, or they're increasing. Maybe in the last, maybe there are more buildings, there are more walls for things to grow on. I really am not quite sure yet. I haven't quite worked out why all these wall ferns are going up. We've still got the same number of canal bridges, probably got a few less. We've certainly got a few less railway bridges, but often you find that the canals and bridges are cleaned and they take all the ferns off, and the railway bridges tend to become very shaded, so they don't really grow very many ferns. So I'm not quite sure why we've got this massive increase. Two that have gone up massively are soft shield fern, which again is western and northern, and the hartstongue fern. Now, this hartstongue fern here certainly is colonising buildings and guttering and walls and culverts, and it's becoming very much an urban fern. So I think this is why we're getting more of it. We're getting many more places, there's many more places it can grow in urban areas. Listicum certiferum is completely different. This is in woodland, and it's often only single plants, maybe one or two, or ditches, and this is coming in from the west. So these are two ferns which have gone up massively. Look, 239% increase. 91 records there, 308 now. That's astonishing increase. 20 here and 99. These are huge increases. So there's something definitely going on with these. Broad buckler fern just is holding its own. It's not much increase there, just gone down a bit, 1%. Now two have gone down. Bracken. Now you wouldn't think bracken would go down, would you? But it has. Now maybe it's gone down because people are eradicating it, or because the areas where it used to live are being built over and been developed, so that it's just simply not there anymore. It's been dug out and thrown away. That's probably particularly true in the northwest. But I'm not sure about. I'm not completely sure why it's gone down. Ethereum Felix Fern, the lady fern, has gone down by 30%. Now that I think is explicable by drainage, land drainage, removal of the wetter ditches, and removal of natural habitats. These are more common in settled, stable habitats. This one, so these are definitely decreasing. But so what's going on? I mean, I think it's very hard to say. I think there's certainly more humid habitats. Maybe we're making more humid habitats for these ferns. Maybe there's more wetter areas. So if we create woodland, we plant hedgerows, make sure ditches are dug out. Maybe that's why. Maybe we're creating more humid places for them. Or maybe it's a bit of climate change. Maybe we're getting wetter. Maybe there's more opportunities for these. Or it could simply be recording bias. But I could understand that with small ferns, but I can't understand it with this. I can't understand why we've got 50% increase in male fern, other than to say it is a generalist and it will live anywhere. So maybe we're creating more open habitats, places where land has been cleared or trees and woodland have been felled. This can then come in. So all in all, the changes are complex. I don't think there's any one factor driving these. I think there's several. There's certainly destruction of habitat and land drainage here. But you think, well, why? If that's the case, why isn't it? If it's wetter, getting wetter, so that these others can live. Well, why isn't it spreading? Well, maybe it can't move out of where it is. Maybe Ethereum Felix, I mean, it doesn't spread very well. Even though it's got spores, maybe there's not many of them viable. Maybe, I don't know. These are things that just pose lots and lots of questions, which I spend, I go to bed and I wake up in the night screaming because I can't answer them. Well, I don't actually, I just said that. And I think, maybe we'll get to the grips with it, but I think this certainly is an indicator that we're getting more disturbed habitat, certainly drier habitat, certainly more disturbed habitat. This one is certainly more of an urban colonist. I think we're losing native habitat here. This is coming in, and maybe it's just like the Pteropterus, it's finding open spaces and it can colonise. So pattern's complex, and I haven't really got my head around it yet. If anybody's got any bright ideas, please send them to me on a postcard. Right, a few odds and ends. And water fern. This is the odd fern. It's actually a fern, but it floats on the top of water. It's actually unmissable. It has these lovely little fronds here. And this is the River Reek, an inlet of the River Reek at Asford in 2018, when we had the very warm summer. In fact, a lot of the Reek looked like this. It was absolutely covered in this fern. And it's odd. It's very, very odd, because it has years like this and it goes absolutely berserk. It covers the entire river system or ponds. It grows mad. It goes to a big, thick, dense sheet. You can put your hand in, you can pull out pounds of it. And then it disappears and you don't see anything of it for 6 to 10 years. Nothing. It just vanishes. I didn't hardly saw any last year at all. In 2019, it was all there, but 2018, you couldn't move for it. In fact, I was a bit concerned about the Reek because it's quite good aquatic flora in there, and it would have been completely, it would have died because there's no light getting to the base of the river. However, it does form a very attractive red colour in the autumn, so people like it. It's a fascinating fern. Again, very sporadic. You get a couple of years we have loads of records and then nothing for a decade. And now the end. A couple of ferns that we've lost. This is Pillwort, which is a fern you'll find in the north and west of Britain. Last record was in 1910 at Moira Reservoir, which has been filled in by again, that's one we've lost. It wasn't very common to start with. It was on the edge of its distribution here, and now it's gone. But how's this one? This is moonwort. I mean, who can't like moonwort? Eh? I love it. It doesn't even look like a fern. These are the sporangia up here. That shares. It acts a bit like the adderstone fern, in this. They're not on the edge of the leaf, so sporangia aren't on the edge here, like they are on the other ferns. They're on a special structure up here on itself. And the last record was at 1977 at Lawn by Ian Evans. And I mean, really, this is the only plant I want to refind in Leicestershire and Rutland. If I refine this, I will give up the role of being recorder because I've achieved my aim. This is the only thing I'm really interested in. It's wonderful. I love it. And one day, well, it may even come back. Who knows? Keep looking. I know it is at Lawn. Unfortunately, the land is actually it's actually private. It might be owned by the Church of England, so I need to get in touch with them and see if I can go and have a look at it. There were a couple of old records from Bradgate Park. Pat Evans, late Pat Evans and Ian Evans recorded it in the early 70s and 60s, and they said then it was declining. So it could pop up in Bradgate Park, who knows? If you do find it, I should be delighted. Right, last little bit of my talk is on pteridomania, or fern madness. It affected Britain between 1914 and in Leicestershire in 2020, and I hope it will. So I want all of you to develop fern madness. I know you probably have anyway, because the whole everything about ferns is so exciting that you can't not really. And ferns appeared absolutely everywhere. They appeared in buildings and designs. People went mad. They went to forays just for ferns. People go to Wales and they clear whole ledges just of ferns just to look at them. They were insane. They were obsessed. It was like, you know, it's like drug. It was a drug. And they used to have ferns in their houses. They built them in private gardens and homes. They even had itinerant fern vendors. So they go up to Wales, dig up some ferns, bring them back, and you go to market and there'd be the itinerant fern vendor. Would sell you a fern, you take it and put it in your Wardian case. Now, your Wardian case, of course, was developed by people at Kew to bring back plants from the tropics, and they put them in these cases and put them onto ships, and they survived and went back to Kew. So people started developing these Wardian cases. Now, here's a Wardian case here. Oh, there it is. If you want to know all about fern mania, I suggest you buy this book by Sarah Whittingham, which is a very good book. It's fascinating reading. See how people went berserk for ferns. If only people went berserk for plants like that today, I'd be happy, except I wouldn't like them digging them all up or going up to mountains and pulling them off the side. But having an obsession with it would be really good. And then I wouldn't be alone. Now, I've told you a lot of things during this talk. And if you only remember one thing, I want you to remember this. And I suspect that some of you, this is the only thing. It's a custard cream made by Huntley and Palmer's from Reading, and it's developed in 1908. Now, why have I got a custard cream up here? Oh, look, what's this? It's a fern. You didn't know that, did you? Custard creams are decorated with ferns. Height of pteridomania. Even in pteridomania, ferns even got onto a biscuit, and we're still eating them today. So, remember, every time you have a custard cream, you're actually looking at a fern. Right, thank you very much. That's the end of my talk, and good hunting.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Thank you very
Many
much.
thanks.
Excellent talk, very comprehensive talk. I think we've probably got time for one or two short questions. If people have other commitments, by all means, feel free. But we have some, if anybody wants questions, if you use the put your hand up tool in the chat window is probably the best way, or you can wave frantically at me or at your video camera. While I'm waiting for some questions to come in, I don't see anyone waving frantically. I had a question about the keys, actually. The question is that with the keys have different terminology. In terms of arriving at a solution, if you stick with one key, does that solve the problem? I assume all the keys eventually give the correct answer. I mean, if you learn one set of technology and stick with one key, one set of terminology, stick with one key, does that solve the problem?
That's exactly the answer I would have given. Just stick with the one. Particularly if you're just starting out, use either one set of one key or the other, and then you won't get confused. But you know, you do appreciate that other people may disagree with you when you use terms in the field. But if you just stick to one, you'll get to the right answer. They both work. They both get to where you want them to be. But just stick to the one.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else want to ask anything? No, they're all itching to get out there and go looking for. Well, you know, we've got a fine week coming up, and as Geoffrey said earlier, it is the perfect time of year to go out looking for ferns. A bit of rainfall would be nice, probably, but nevertheless, I hope you will all go out looking. And if you find any of the rarer species, I know Geoffrey would like to hear from you. Other than that, we would like your records to Nature Spot, where they will all be verified, they will all be checked, and if we're not sure of anything, I'm sure it will be passed in front of Geoffrey anyway at some point. Do try and photograph the features that he's pointed out during his talk. We will make the video recording of this talk available, so if you've forgotten whether it's 2.5 pinnate or 1.5 pin, no, don't get 1.5 pinnate, but then you will be able to go and watch the video recording. So I'll just thank Geoffrey once again for an excellent talk.